Hello, I'm Robert Royal, and this is number 4 in our series of podcasts from the Catholic Thing. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Catholic Thing, which is a daily column series. We're also producing these videos, which we're putting under the category of the Vatican Thing, because, of course, we're in the midst of a month-long synod on synodality in Rome, which is where I'm coming to you from this morning. I'm delighted to have with us today Larry Chapp, Dr. Larry Chapp, who taught theology for many years at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. He's also now the head of a Catholic worker farm in Pennsylvania. And he's a unique figure in a way. I've been reading him for quite a while. He's a unique figure in the way that he combines both a kind of very high theological capacity to analyze ideas with a very shrewd ability to analyze what's going on, sort of practically speaking, in the church and in the world at this moment. So, Larry, it's good to have you with us today. Larry's in Rome.
Great to be here,
well.
And thank you for those kind words.
I'm a truth teller. It's just the truth.
Okay.
Let me start with this, because you've written recently. We all know that there seems to be a kind of a problem in the church, that there's a progressive theology that's come more and more to the fore under Pope Francis. It's existed for a long time, probably over a century in the church. And you wrote about how in the 20th century there were efforts both through Neo-Thomism and what's sometimes called ressourcement theology, more of a personalist rather than an Aristotelian Thomist approach to theology. Yet there wasn't a response that was adequate after Vatican II to the kind of progressivism that had kind of entered into the theological guild. So could you just tell us in kind of general terms for our viewers why that attempt to answer progressivism was not successful, and perhaps what we need to do now in order to provide a better rationale for more sound theological principles?
Yes, I begin with talking about Vatican II because I think it is instructive as to what's going on with the Synod right now. And I'm going to begin with Joseph Ratzinger here. Ratzinger himself said, I think it was in his interview with Peter Seewald in the biography there, where Ratzinger said, we were so intent at the council on getting the theology right that we probably didn't pay enough attention to the pastoral consequences that might fall out, or the pastoral situation really on the ground. And then, later on, he also said similar things, and he said that there were two councils. There was the real council, and there was the council of the media. And I think if you put those two comments of Ratzinger together, you get at the heart of what the problem was, which was there was a certain naivete, I think, among many of the council fathers of the ressourcement or Thomistic school, that all you had to do was get the theology right and everything was going to be okay. But what the progressives did after the council was, they did theology all right, but they also made great use of the mass media, and they co-opted the mass media. And, the secular mass media were more than happy to spin the council as this liberal reform of the Catholic Church. And the progressives took hold of the narrative, the post-conciliar narrative, in the cultural consciousness of average Catholics who don't read theology books. So I'm not saying theology isn't important. As I say in the piece, we have to do good theology to counteract bad theology. And that we're not going to be able to rely on simply ecclesial authority and ecclesial discipline to sort of kick all the liberals out of the church. We have to make good arguments, and we have. But we also then, because theology is necessary but not sufficient, we have to pay attention to the culture. We have to pay attention to mass media. We have to pay attention to the many, many ways now, today, there are far more media outlets. I mean, in the 60s, there were only a few media choke points, as I call them, that if you got control of those, you could control the narrative. It's not so possible to do that anymore. So as we approach this synodal process over the next 2 years, I think it's extremely important that those on our side of the theological aisle do not look down their noses at things like blogs and YouTube videos. So I commend you for what you're doing here. I think we need to make real use of this, because that's what's going to win the day, is who controls the narrative in the popular Catholic consciousness after the synod is over.
Yeah. No, I think that that's absolutely true. And I mean, you've written, for example, that the Holy Father is not a heretic, so we shouldn't accuse him of doing that. And we want to have solid, sober analysis of what's going on.
Right.
One of my concerns, for example, just to take a particular case, because the LGBT thing is such a hot button issue in the culture as a whole, and of course inside the church during this synod as well. You could parse out, I suppose, very finely in a theological way what it would mean to bless a same-sex union or bless the people. I keep getting people writing me that I'm inaccurately portraying what the Holy Father says, that he's talking about blessing persons who are in civil unions. But along the line that you were just talking about, the narrative or the unintended consequence, if you wanted to say, well, we want to bless people so that they will live better lives, of course, that's fine theologically. But the world doesn't understand it that way. So we're back to that old principle that what is said isn't necessarily what is communicated. What gets communicated to people is that, gay is okay. I remember when the Holy Father said, who am I to judge? My young teenage daughter came home from school one day and said, Dad, did you hear that the Holy Father said that being gay is okay? That's how it gets transmitted through these channels. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to say, with regard to the same-sex union, I'm completely on board with your analysis. The Pope certainly cannot be so naive as to think how this is, that this is going to be spun properly in the mass media, when already the mass media, from AP to Reuters to various Catholic outlets, say, oh, the Pope just greenlighted same-sex blessings. And how many people down there, and how many, Father Rainbow Sash, who does gay blessings, in our large urban centers, how much are they going to pay attention to that fine distinction between blessing persons and blessing unions? That's not going to happen. Already some of these blessings take place sub rosa all over the place, so it's not so sub rosa. And I know personally, openly, and I know of many cases where, it's the groom and the groom both show up in tuxedos, and they're exchanging rings, and the people in the congregation are all decked out in their finery, holding up signs, congratulations on your wedding, Tom and Jerry, and off to a big reception they go. That's exactly how it's going to get spun. It's not going to get spun as this fine distinction, between things. And that's the tragedy of it.
Yeah, and of course, it's going to be extremely hard for any bishop or any priest to resist the public exposure. I mean, if you say that Father X announces that not in this parish is there going to be a blessing of gay unions, well, the activists are going to come out and progressives in the church are going to come out and saying he's rigid, he's not following where the Holy Father wants to go. I saw an analysis just this morning of something that worries me even more, because I've often thought that as bad as the situation is in the United States, our Supreme Court generally defends religious liberty. So the church has a right to define who is a minister and how the church is going to be conducted. But if there's this ambiguity about the Pope, and I want to go sue my bishop because he won't allow gay blessings, and it goes to court, some liberal judge is going to say, well, your own Pope has said that there are cases in which you can do this. How can you resist it?
Yeah, and you're going to get this patchwork quilt of some dioceses the bishop will ban it, other dioceses the bishop will allow it. But gradually over time, if the practice continues, the future Pope doesn't reverse it, it's just going to become a fait accompli, and fewer bishops are going to oppose it. And priests that oppose it are going to be disciplined by their bishops. And I think we need to look at what has happened in the Anglican Communion here. Just, they started off with a sort of tepid approval of same-sex unions, blessings, and so forth. And then that quickly morphed into, well, we need to accept gay marriage. And any priest or bishop that opposed it, was frowned upon. And so now you've got this big split between the African Anglicans and the global North Anglicans. And it's a hot mess. And that's exactly where we're headed to.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this because one of the claims that's being made by the spokespeople for the Synod is that we have a lot to learn from the Eastern Orthodox and from the Protestants about synodality. And, if you look at this with a kind of a jaundiced eye, what we learn is that synodality isn't all that easy. That I tried to have a pan-Orthodox meeting in Greece, I think, 5 or 6 years
Crete.
ago. No, in Crete, yeah, and
Yeah.
the Russians wouldn't show up, and there are all kinds of divisions within the different Orthodox churches. The Anglicans, who have a kind of synod, have African bishops who say we no longer accept the Archbishop of Canterbury, and they call on him to repent. There are synods among other Protestant denominations that are divided along cultural lines. It seems to me that starting a new process of synodality precisely invites these divisions to become more explicit than they were in the past. But who am I? I'm a literature guy, and you're a theologian.
Yeah, but I agree with you completely. Synodality is being thrown around vaguely as a term, but once in a while the Holy Father is made mention of. We're just trying to be, as the Eastern Orthodox are, but it's a kind of romanticization of what the Eastern Orthodox are. Look how wonderful they are in their synodal process. They don't seem to need a pope and so on. But you're exactly right. At that, they tried to hold an ecumenical council, and the Russian Orthodox Church, that represents 2/3 of the world's Orthodox, refused to attend because of some jurisdictional question about, and the Orthodox are always arguing over canonical jurisdiction. That's been going on for a millennium.
Yeah. Well, listen, we're kind of getting near the end of our time, but I want to put another large question to you. You've written quite beautifully about being in the seminary during the time when things changed after Vatican II. And I think you've had some shrewd observations about how that process actually morphed from being a church that knew what it believed into this amorphous thing that happened afterward. Do you have a sense? I mean, you've only been in Rome here, I guess, a week or so, as have I.
Yeah.
But given that experience you had right after Vatican II, do you have a sense of something similar happening right now?
I do and I don't. In one sense, I think the most lay people in the church today, even if they know about the synod, seem rather apathetic towards the synod. And I made mention of this, that the mass attendance at the opening round was, just 5,000 or so. And the listening sessions had only like 1% of Catholics. And even the Holy Father himself said, well, most Catholics probably aren't really interested in this, but it's still important anyway. And that might end up being, in some ways, a blessing, because with regard to the council, that was an ecumenical council, and it was a huge deal, and there was a massive media buildup, and even average Catholics were excited about it and talking about it and so on everywhere. And so when the post-conciliar silly season, as George Weigel calls it, hit home, a lot of Catholics were prepared for that in some sense, because they kind of wanted the silly season. That's what they expected. And therefore, those of us who didn't like the silly season were sort of, it's ironic, the word in seminary when I was there was, if you opposed all of this craziness, you were rigid. And that's a term that Pope Francis throws around all the time, even now. But it is also, though, similar, in regards to the aims of many of the progressives who are at the synod. And their aims have not changed at all, and they are intent on still capturing the narrative high ground and capturing the imagination through mass media of the average Catholic. And so there is a grave danger here of chaos, a grave danger of a new wave of dissent and crazy things going on, like same-sex blessings everywhere. And so, yeah, I sense an eerily similar atmosphere in that regard.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting time, Larry, and we thank you for coming here and clarifying some of these things. We're going to all stay at this entire month and probably into the future. So,
thank you.
That's all we have time for today. So, I'd like to just thank all of you for coming and viewing today, and come back again, because we're trying to do some analysis more than news, because there isn't as much news coming out of the synod as in the past. for obvious reasons that there's been limitation on how much the participants can talk to us. But we'd like to continue to talk with experts like Larry and many others here in Rome who will help us find our way through this process of this synod on synodality. So we'll see you next time.